What's going on, everybody? Happy Tuesday. It is just after 5:30, which means we are going to go live here for the next 15 or 20 minutes, and I'm going to answer any of the health questions that you guys may have. So, quick plug here before we get started. We do have a couple upcoming events in the office next Tuesday at 6 o'clock. I have cortisol talk I'm doing, so all things stress. If you guys are dealing with, constant fatigue and burnout and infertility and hormonal issues and weight gain and all these things that could potentially be stress related, you've got to come to my talk next week because I'm going to dive into all things health, all things cortisol related, and how we can work to restore balance with our cortisol and our stress hormones. So you can't miss that. October 18th, all of our cycling and young females. We are going to be doing a female health event in the office. We're going to have all sorts of vendors. It's going to be kind of a curated shopping experience. We're going to have a lot of like self-care, some exercises, some inspirational speakers, some health-related speakers. And this is going to be an awesome event from 10 o'clock until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So 4 hours of self-care in the office, October 18th. So now we got that out of the way, we're going to continue going here. So the first question I had from last week was about hair loss and kind of what we can do to help support hair loss. So there's a lot of reasons that we may have hair loss. Hormonal imbalances can affect that if our hormones are low. Thyroid imbalances, malabsorption within the gut. There's all sorts of things that can play an impact in hair loss. So it's hard to answer that question specifically without understanding where the patient's labs are at and without looking at them. But I would say the most common causes of hair loss that we see in the office are going to be things like hypothyroidism. Hyperthyroidism can also cause hair issues. Typically, that's going to be more thin and brittle hair, whereas hypothyroidism, one of the key signs of that is going to be your hair falling out like in chunks, things like that. Hormonal imbalances can cause hair loss as well. One of the big ones we talk about, especially in guys, we see that male pattern baldness as we're converting our testosterone into DHT, which is dihydrotestosterone. It's a more potent androgen. So if we have too much 5-alpha reductase activity and we're pushing too heavily into that DHT pathway, we're going to cause a lot of hair loss and things like that. Fun fact for guys, hair loss or high DHT levels will cause male pattern baldness, like you can see I've got going on the top of your head. They will also cause thick hair growth on the face. So those DHT receptors do code for different things in different areas, and there's nothing you can do about the receptors. That kind of layout of receptors that you may have is genetically programmed, which is why some guys will get baldness back here, some guys will get this male pattern baldness in the front, and a lot of times those guys also have really thick beards because those DHT receptors code for different things in different areas. One of the next things, kind of talking about hair loss, viewing into malabsorption a little bit, because that was the next question, is what can we talk about with malabsorption? One of the issues with hair loss is if we just don't have enough nutrition coming into the body, it's not going to prioritize hair growth. And then just real quick before we get into malabsorption, talking about hair loss, when you are dealing with hair loss, I know hair loss is the only thing that you can think about, and it's the only symptom that you care about getting resolved. And unfortunately, hair loss is a trailing indicator of health, which means it's going to be one of the last things to start to see improvements with. So we may be working on things for 3, 4, 5 months before we're really going to start to see hair loss improve or a significant difference in hair loss. And I always tell people, usually what happens and the way it works when you're trying to gain your hair back is you don't notice that overnight your hair is just thicker, but you'll just notice in 6 months from now, you'll look at the drain and realize there's not as much hair in the drain as there was maybe 6 months before that. So because it's such a slow process, typically we don't tend to notice a huge change just because it's happening so slowly. Or you'll meet up with someone you saw 6 months ago and they'll be like, oh, look, your hair looks a lot better, because they haven't seen you for a long time. So just tempering expectations, if you are trying to regain your hair, just understand it's going to be a long process. And it's going to be kind of frustrating, and you're probably not going to notice a huge change until you just randomly one day look down at the sink, or you see someone you haven't seen in a while. You look at a picture of yourself from 5 months ago and you go, oh, look, I have way less hair back then than I do now. So just understanding that is really important. When we talk about malabsorption, so I think this specific question about malabsorption was related to gut health and gut function. So how do I know if I'm absorbing nutrients in my gut, and how do I know if those nutrients are being utilized in my body? And so if you're watching and that's not the question that you were asking, or you wanted a different answer, just let me know. I can readdress the question next week. But Yeah, malabsorption and nutrition is a huge issue. Just because you're eating food doesn't mean your body knows what to do with it or can utilize it appropriately. And this is something we see all the time. One of the tests we run more than any other test is actually a stool test, and that looks at how we're breaking down and digesting proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. If we don't have the necessary systems in place to digest the food that we're eating, we're just not going to be able to absorb it. And it doesn't matter what we're eating, we're not getting the nutrition out of that. So just a quick overview of how the gut works. We've got stomach acid. The stomach is the most acidic place in the body. That's where we really start the breakdown and the chemical digestion of food. Obviously, we get mechanical digestion in the mouth. We get chemical digestion partly in the mouth, but a lot of that's in the stomach with stomach acid. And then that digestion continues as we go through the small intestine into the large intestine. And so when we look at things like proteins are mainly broken down in the stomach. That's where acid is super important. So if we don't have enough acid in the stomach, we won't be able to break those proteins down. Acid decreases in the stomach mainly because of stress. And so if we're really stressed out, that's the first thing we've got to address. Again, if you're stressed out, shameless plug, come to my stress talk next Tuesday where I'm going to talk all about that. But if you're stressed, we've got to kind of work on that first because that's going to have a big impact on stomach acid and it's going to shut off your digestive system. So if we don't have enough stomach acid, that's the first thing. The other thing that depletes stomach acid that a lot of people are taking are PPIs, which are proton pump inhibitors. They're taking Tums, they're jumping on Prilosec, all these things because they have heartburn, which in reality, a lot of times heartburn is the result of too low of stomach acid for a long period of time because it is the acid itself that stimulates the cells in the stomach to release the mucosa that protects that stomach lining. So if we aren't having high enough acid levels, we won't be able to stimulate those cells that secrete the protective mucosal barrier. That barrier gets broken down. Any increase in acid because of diet or a need to digest or eating acidic foods, we're going to start to get that burning because we don't have the protective mucosal barrier there. So we've got to slowly increase acid over time. And then we've got to work to stimulate those cells with things like chamomile, okra, slippery elm, aloe. There's a lot of things that can help repair and replace that mucosal barrier. So if you're having heartburn and you're taking a bunch of PPIs, that's just going to shut down digestion even more, and we are going to get nutrient deficiencies as a result of that. So when we talk about kind of breaking down and getting into this nutrient absorption, again, the first thing we've got to do is make sure that we've got plenty of stomach acid going. Then we've got to make sure that the pancreas and the gallbladder are functioning properly also. Both of those, by the way, are cued by a series of chemical reactions that are stimulated by stomach acid and the acidity of the bile and the chyme that's being produced in the stomach and kind of secreted into the small intestine right there. So if we don't have acidic substances coming from the stomach into the small intestine, we're not going to stimulate the pancreas or the gallbladder to secrete properly. So the pancreas produces pancreatic elastase and a lot of other amylases and lipases and things like that that help us break down carbohydrates. If the pancreas isn't working properly, we can't break down carbs. If we can't break down carbs, they sit there and they feed bacteria. We don't get to digest or take advantage of any of the nutrition in there, and then we lead a lot of times to bacterial overgrowth, yeast overgrowth, things like that in the gut. If we're not stimulating the gallbladder is not going to be releasing bile with the bile salts. The bile salts are super important for emulsifying fats so that the body can absorb them. The bile is produced in the liver. It's stored in the gallbladder, so that's why they tell you that you can get your gallbladder taken out and you're not going to have any issues as a result of that. Typically, I see issues 10, 15, 20 years down the line when people have had their gallbladders taken out, and now they've got a bunch of digestive issues that happen. And the reason for that is because the liver produces the bile, so we get this slow trickle of bile. We don't get a big release when we need it, when the fat is actually put into the small intestine, so that digestion and absorption is not going to happen right away. So that's one of the big things. If we're missing organs, if the pancreas isn't functioning properly, if we don't have enough stomach acid because of chronic stress, or if we're taking something that depletes stomach acid, all of that's going to affect digestion, which will then affect absorption of nutrients that we're getting from our food. The other piece of this is that a lot of our food that we're eating just is nutrient deplete. The soil that the food is grown in doesn't have the nutrients it's supposed to, and if the nutrients aren't in the soil, they're not going to be in the crops, and if they're not in the crops, they're not going to be on your plate or in your body as well. So taking some degree of supplement is super important, just because a lot of times we're just not getting the nutrition that we're supposed to be getting, even if we were to eat the right foods. So we've got to take a look at digestion and diet. That's super important when it comes to malabsorption. And we can actually test for that. So we can look at a stool test. I've got a stool test here that looks at kind of our digestion absorption. You can see right here, malabsorption. This person specifically has a 10 for malabsorption. So we know that they're not going to be breaking down and absorbing things that they're supposed to. And when we look at this specifically, we can see their pancreatic elastase, which is what measures pancreatic function, is super, super low. Their products of protein breakdown are pretty high. Fecal fats actually looked okay, but this patient is not breaking down proteins very well, and we know they're not breaking down carbohydrates very well. So that's going to be kind of the first thing that we can look at with testing, is to understand what's going on with that digestive process. The other really cool thing that we can look at is if we want to look at how well the nutrients are being utilized in your body and where you may be deplete, we can look at what's called a Nutri-Eval panel. And just like the name suggests, this gives us a really good overview of a bunch of different biological systems in the body and kind of looks at the nutrients that run different pathways. And based on where those pathways are at, we can get a really good understanding of what nutrients you may need more of. And then this gives you a really, really nice summary right here that shows you exactly how much of a lot of the different nutrients you need. And you can see kind of where those nutrients come from in food, what makes them depleted, what the symptoms of depletion may be, and then how we can kind of work to get those nutrients back up. So this Nutri-Eval panel is awesome if you suspect that you may have nutrient deficiency, which I haven't seen a patient come back on a Nutri-Eval panel that doesn't have nutrient deficiency. There's a lot of them that are really popular, a lot of your B vitamins, specifically like B12, B6, B9. B12 super low, that's going to be our methylcobalamin or cyanocobalamin. That's a really important one for methylation. Methylation is involved in a ton of different processes in the body, but B12 specifically, number one, comes from meat for the most part. So if we're not eating a lot of meat or a lot of protein, specifically red meat, we're just not going to have a lot of that in the diet. And the other thing is that we have to have stomach acid in order to absorb B12. So if we don't have stomach acid and we can't absorb B12, then we're not going to have the utilization in the body. We need to take a supplemental form, but really what we need to do is work on the stress, improve the stomach acid, eat the foods that have it in the first place, and then we can kind of overcome that. So malabsorption is a pretty kind of nuanced topic. That was a general overview, but the big things that we're looking at in the office when it comes to malabsorption is, what are you putting in your mouth? How is your body breaking down and absorbing that? And then how is your body utilizing those nutrients in the body? And if we're utilizing a specific nutrient a lot more than another nutrient, there's going to be a higher need for that. And so what you think may be adequate may actually not be adequate. And we can look at all of that on testing, which can be super helpful, because then we can create a regimen and plan for you moving forward with giving your body exactly what it needs from a physiological standpoint. So I hope that answers your question about malabsorption. And then, funny enough, we have another gut question. So this is one I get all the time about GLP-1, things like semaglutide, Ozempic. And this, again, is a very nuanced, this is very emotionally triggering conversation as well, because anytime we're talking about weight, a lot of the people who have gotten results from the GLP-1 analogs are people who have struggled with weight for a really long time, and it's gotten them really great results. So I don't want to take any of that away from anybody who maybe has used these and been successful with them. I've also had patients that have used them and had no success. And more often than not, what happens is people get on them, they lose some weight, they realize they don't want to have to inject themselves all the time, or they don't want to be taking a medication for the rest of their life, so they come off of it. But then nobody talked to them about what a plan needs to be like to get their life back on track and kind of build a healthy lifestyle. And so they end up gaining all the weight back, and then we do these kind of rebounding and yo-yo effects. So the big thing is, just from my standpoint, is number one, GLP-1 is produced in your body naturally. So if we can do things that increase GLP-1 naturally, I'd rather do that than inject it. And then if we are going to inject it, we just need to make sure that we're doing the correct things so that we're avoiding things like muscle wasting, losing too much weight too fast, all of that stuff. So the big thing when we're talking about what can increase GLP-1 naturally, protein, some specific amino acids, making sure you're getting plenty of protein into your diet, super important. Making sure you're getting plenty of fat into your diet, super important. Both of those are not high on the list of the standard American diet. If we just look at the food pyramid or my plate, it's high in carbohydrates. So we know the diet that most people are eating is not going to produce a lot of GLP-1. So switching to a high protein, high fat diet can be very beneficial for producing that GLP-1. Exercise, also super important. Specifically, if you exercise and do some strength training after a high protein meal, that's been shown to increase GLP-1 levels even more. So again, exercise, protein, fat, diet, and lifestyle, super important with that. The other one is sleep. And what happens is, if we're not sleeping properly, we're going to actually get decreases in GLP-1. So it's not always just about increasing GLP-1. That's obviously important, but we also want to make sure that we're not doing things that are decreasing it. So making sure that you're getting good sleep. Sleep's really difficult. Sleep's another one of those conversations where people take things all the time for sleep. And there's a lot of different reasons that we aren't sleeping. So having a conversation with somebody about that, super important as well. Stress and cortisol levels are extremely important when it comes to sleep. So another shameless plug for my talk next week, where I'm going to talk all about stress levels and kind of how we can modulate those stress responses in the body and how you can actually promote good sleep naturally and make sure that you're doing all the right stuff. Because there are a lot of effective things to help you sleep, but just because you're sleeping through the night doesn't mean your body's in that REM sleep, heal and repair phase, which is super important. So we don't want to just have to rely on things like Ambien to fall asleep at night, because it does have a negative impact on the actual quality of sleep that we're getting, and clearing out amyloid plaques in your body, healing and repairing and integrating stresses, and all of that is super important, but it happens during REM sleep, which if we're not getting, we're not going to be getting any of those benefits from sleep. So super important. And then when it comes to increasing GLP-1 as well, there's some emerging research on sauna and cold plunging. Those are known to improve a lot of hormonal responses in the body, and they're looking into whether or not that can increase GLP-1, but it looks like early emerging research does show that that can increase GLP-1 as well. So again, I don't have a super, my overall take on GLP-1 is I prefer that you work on doing things naturally. We don't want to just rely on medications or injections, things like that. Even if it is a substance that's found naturally in the body, we want to promote natural occurrence of that GLP-1. We want to make sure that we've got diet and lifestyle locked in. And then if you are going to take it, we want to make sure that we're eating plenty of protein and doing strength training. So we're going to limit any of that muscle wasting, and that we create a plan for you moving forward. And this goes with anything. If your doctor puts you on a medication but doesn't have a plan for you to get off of it, then they're not really helping you get better. They're just medicating you. And we never want to do that. We always want to help to create a plan for you so that you can get off medications, get off supplements, and get your life back, get yourself healthy again without relying on all of that stuff. So I know that was a lot. We dug into a lot with hair loss, malabsorption, some GLP-1 stuff. I didn't see any comments come through here. So like I said at the beginning, if you've got comments, if you watch this back, drop the comments below. That's how I get most of these questions, is people watch it back afterwards. I will make sure to answer you, and I'll try to tag you in the video when it gets posted next week. Next week, I do have my cortisol talk in the office, so we're going to talk about all things stress, what makes you stressed, wired, and tired, and how you can work on improving your stress responses naturally so that you don't have to continue being in this cycle of fatigued and no energy and brain fog during the day, and wired but not able to sleep at night. And then again, we do have our women's talk coming up on October 18th. This is going to be a 4-hour event in the office. It's going to be a self-care day. There's going to be lots of vendors there. They're going to have some shopping experiences. We're going to have some stretching. We're going to have all sorts of fun stuff. And there's going to be a lot of speakers coming in to give you guys a lot of really valuable insights. So we hope to see you guys there. You guys can get tickets for that, twwsarasota.com.